In October of last year, Cisco closed out the third year of its AI Readiness Index. For those of you who don't know what that is, the index is a study that has now surveyed more than 8,000 businesses and AI leaders across 30 markets and 26 industries. And when finally the researchers pulled out the one number that actually really matters, the share of companies that qualify as genuinely ready to get value from AI, it eventually landed in the exact same place it landed the year before and the year before this. 13%, remember this number. Cisco calls that 13% the pace setters. And there is a very good reason for it. The group that outperforms everyone else across every measure of AI value the study tracks. And everyone outside of this group, they are running somewhere behind them. On its own, 13% sounds like a slightly disappointing statistic. The kind of number that you would probably just move on and pass. But I want you to think of the second half of that sentence for a moment. Because this is exactly the part that should actually bother you. This is actually the third year running that this study has found the same result. Across 3 years in which company after company opened the budget for AI, hired for it, and built new teams around it, and the number of companies that actually got ready did not move at all. Flat. Just the same number for 3 straight years through what has probably been the heaviest run of AI spending most of these companies have ever done. So the real question I want to spend the next few minutes on is not why 13% is so low. It is the stranger question sitting underneath it. What does it actually mean that 3 years of spending bought that number exactly nothing? Hey everyone, Petko Petkov here. And if you're new to this channel, the short version of what I do is that I spend my time on the operations side of AI. Because after 15 years inside enterprise IT, I have watched and witnessed far more companies get the budget approved and the demo working and still land outside that 13% than I have ever watched an AI model actually fail. So I want to talk about a read almost everyone reaches for when a number refuses to move like that. People treat this as a patience problem and say readiness is early. The tooling is still maturing, and we will say, well, give it another cycle, and the curve will eventually bend the way every other technology curve bends. Or they would reach to a budget explanation running the complete opposite direction and say the number is flat because most companies simply have not spent enough yet. So eventually the fix is what they're trying to sell you is more of the same thing. Spend more, and next year's numbers finally moves up. Well, both of those readings fall apart against the same piece of evidence, which is exactly that this was not a quiet 3 year for AI spending. Budgets moved and moved by a lot across every one of the 30 markets and 26 industries that this study covers. If the flat 13% were a money problem, 3 years of rising spend across that many markets and industries should have dragged at least some meaningful share of companies over the line. Instead, what happened is the study kept finding almost the same result, year after year. And when a number refuses to move eventually, despite the one input everyone assumed would move it, this is definitely not an evidence that you need more of that input. That is evidence you have been pulling the wrong lever the entire time. But naming the wrong lever is not the same as knowing which one actually carries the weight. And most people guessed wrong about that too. I want you to ask most people what actually separates that 13% from everyone else. And the guess will come back the same way nearly every single time. Better talent, a smarter vendor, a more advanced model somewhere in the stack. But Cisco's own data says none of that. And it says so in 3 findings, specific enough to rule out the budget line. The clearest market shows up after a pilot already works. Pace setters are 4 times more likely than everyone else to take a pilot that works and actually move it into production. I want you to picture two ordinary, entirely hypothetical teams at two ordinary companies. So they're given the exact same starting point. A pilot that works in a demo, a sponsor who likes it, and a modest budget. One team will ship it into real operation inside a quarter. The other team's version sits in pilot limbo for a year. It will get redemoed at the next planning cycle and slowly becomes the project nobody wants to cancel. Same starting budget, remember. Same working demo. A 4 times difference in whether it ever became real. And the status not ready is not an abstract idea in this study either. It is a physical idea. 54% of the organizations Cisco surveyed said the following: their own networks cannot scale for the complexity of the data volume that current AI workloads actually need. This is not a strategy gap. It is not a talent gap. This is a company running real AI workloads on infrastructure that was sized for a world before those workloads ever existed. And I think we need to draw a line here. No amount of software spending is gonna fix a network that cannot carry the load. On the other side, 90% of the pace setters, they report real gains in profitability, in productivity, and in innovation. Among everyone else, this number drops to roughly 60%. This gap shows up directly on a P&L, and none of it came from a bigger AI budget. It came just simply from the same operational foundation that produces the 4 times gap you just heard. The 4 times gap next to the 54% finding and a specific picture forms. The 13% were not winning because they had access to better AI. They were winning because they had already built an operation underneath the AI that could actually carry it. A path to production that already exists. Infrastructure that had already been sized for the load. And processes that did not fall over the first time something moved from pilot to real use. The money bought the pilots. It did not buy any of this that I just mentioned. So I want to put this in a single slide. This is the reframe, and it is really the whole video compressed into one single line. Readiness is not something a budget produces. It is an operational property. And it comes from consistent processes, from infrastructure that is actually sized for what you're running on, and from decisions rights that were written down instead of re-argued every quarter. None of this arrives because finance approved an actual bigger number. It arrives because somebody did the unglamorous work of building it on purpose. This is the only explanation that fits 3 flat years against a rising budget line. If readiness were something money could buy directly, 3 years of heavier spending across 30 markets should have bought at least a little of it. Wouldn't you agree? It bought pilots, it bought tools, and it bought headcount. It didn't buy the thing this study is actually measuring, because this was never for sale. So if you've ever watched this channel before, you already know where this is gonna go, because the operational foundation underneath the pace setters is the very same foundation I have spent this whole series breaking down, the 5 layers of AI radio operations. And if this is eventually the first video you have landed on, here is the entire map in about 90 seconds, because it is the thing that 13% have that a bigger budget cannot buy on its own. The first layer is governance, deciding before you build anything where AI is actually allowed to make a call. Who owns that decision? And that is a written page, not a purchase order. The second one is clean data, because an agent amplifies whatever you point it at, and no amount of spending is gonna turn this fragmented, contradictory records into a trustworthy source overnight. The second is clean data, because an agent amplifies what you pointed at. And the truth is, no amount of spending is gonna turn fragmented, contradictory records into a trustworthy source overnight. The third is standardized process, because you cannot automate work that every team still does its own way, no matter what you paid for the tool that was supposed to automate it. The fourth one is controls, and this is your audit trail, and the rollback path that lets something fast and autonomous run without quietly doing damage you only discover a quarter later. And finally, the fifth one is your operating model, the unglamorous question of who owns this after the launch demo. So this is the layer that decides whether a pilot with 4 times the odds of reaching production actually gets there. Think about it for a second. Notice what all these 5 have in common. Every one of them is something you build, not something you buy. You can fund all 5 generously as much as you want, and you still cannot skip straight to owning them by writing a bigger check. But knowing the 5 things you have to build is not the same as knowing which one to check first before you approve one more dollar of spend. And that is exactly the Monday morning question this study leaves you sitting with. So I want to talk about the following. So what do you actually do with a number like this? Other than feel a little less impressed by whatever this year's AI budget increase was supposed to prove. Before you ask for next year's AI budget, or sign off on the one a vendor is walking you through this quarter, stop asking how much this should cost and start asking the question a flat 13% suggests almost nobody is asking. Let's imagine the following scenario. If this budget doubles tomorrow, which of our actual constraints would that money remove? I dare you to walk your own operations against the 5 layers. Do it honestly. Is the decision governed? Is the data clean enough to trust it? Is the process standard enough that automating it doesn't just automate the mess? And can your infrastructure in fact carry the load that you're about to put on it? Wherever the honest answer is that more money would not touch it, you have just found the reason spending alone was never going to move you into the 13%. This one exercise specifically, run before you approve the next dollar. This one will tell you more about where you actually stand than another spending increase ever will. So let's recap now what the study showed. 3 years of spending moved the number by nothing. Readiness was never the budget problem. So finally, this brings me to the question I would put actually in front of a leadership team before they even approve one more dollar of AI budget. Because I think most companies are just still asking the same wrong question all over again. And it is always about the budget of how much we have to spend this year, etc. This is a question finance is always glad to negotiate with you. But this study actually suggests the first real question, the one that actually predicts whether you move toward the 13% or just stay exactly where you are. If the budget doubled tomorrow, ask yourself, what would you actually change about how you run operations? If you want a structured way, instead of guessing, I have put together a free AI ready assessment. I'll make sure the link is posted in the description. It will walk you through those same 5 layers as a readiness check against your own systems. You can see, honestly, whether you're looking at an operational gap or an actual spending gap, which are essentially 2 very different problems with 2 very different ways to fix them. And of course, if you want to keep this simple, on one page, I've put together a free cheat sheet for this video at my website. So, eventually the next time this study updates and the number that comes back is still sitting somewhere near 13%, you don't need to read it eventually as a bad news for AI or as proof that your industry simply moves slowly. You can read it as the clearest confirmation yet of the rule this whole channel is built on. Your AI maturity will never exceed your operational maturity. 3 years of rising spend against a number that never moved. This is not a story about companies that did not care enough or did not pay enough. The clearest proof that the budget was never the hard part. The operation was. Now, if this was useful, please subscribe, because every week I'm taking the operator lens to exactly these moments. I talk about the studies, the numbers, the headlines everyone is arguing about, and asking the only question that actually matters, which is exactly what it changes about how you run this. And if you want to go deeper, of course, and past this single video, the full operator library, The playbooks and the courses is linked below as well. And if you have lived through this, if you have had budget approved and the demo working and still ended up outside the 13%, then do not be a stranger. Drop me a note in the comments and tell me where it's told. I read them and I will come back to you. And honestly, a good half of what ends up here actually started at somebody. This somebody is me, writing in about their own Tuesday. So I want to leave you with this. Remember, don't build better AI, build better operations.